He had just walked off the court in Denver. The Lakers had lost, again, on a call that LeBron James believed, and that the replay seemed to confirm, should have gone the other way. Nikola Jokic had fouled him going to the basket in the fourth quarter. The referee had looked at it. The referee had processed it. The referee had decided it was marginal. And LeBron James, a man who has played 23 seasons of professional basketball, who has seen more foul calls and no calls and post-game admissions of error than any player in the history of the sport, stood in front of the media in that Denver locker room and said the word that has defined his relationship with NBA officiating for the better part of a decade. The word that, when a referee says it to LeBron James, apparently causes something to ignite deep inside a competitor who has never in his life accepted the idea that anything affecting the outcome of a basketball game should be treated as unimportant. He repeated it, sarcastically, furiously, with the barely contained anger of a man who has heard it one too many times. Marginal. He said it was the same thing. Always the same thing, marginal, and he said he was so tired of that word that he could not find the appropriate language for broadcast television to express exactly how tired he was. That was March 5th, 2026, and then, 6 days later, on Tuesday, March 10th, he sat down with Steve Nash on their Mind the Game podcast and delivered something even more significant than an angry post-game quote. He delivered a full, coherent, carefully constructed argument about what is actually wrong with NBA officiating. Not just one missed call, not just one referee, the entire system, the entire structure, the entire culture of an institution that he said, in his exact words, was failing the players who depend on it to make the game fair. And the response from every corner of the basketball world was immediate, divided, and louder than almost anything LeBron James has said in the last year of his career. Because when the greatest player in the history of professional basketball sits down and says the system is broken, people listen. Whether they agree or not, they listen. This is the full story of what he said, what it means, and why the conversation he started this week may outlast even his retirement. To understand why LeBron James calling out NBA officiating in March of 2026 carries the weight that it does, why it is not just another athlete complaining about a bad call, you have to understand the full history of this specific conflict, because LeBron James and the question of NBA officiating have been intertwined for 23 years, not as a minor subplot, as one of the defining tensions of his entire career. It began with his size. From the moment LeBron James stepped onto an NBA court as an 18-year-old in 2003, 6'8", 240 pounds, the most physically imposing guard-sized player the sport had ever seen, the question of how to officiate him was unprecedented, because LeBron did not fit any existing template. He was too big to be treated like a guard. He was too fast and too skilled to be treated like a center. He drove through contact that would have floored any other player and kept going, finishing over defenders who were trying to foul him, and often looked like they had barely touched him because the force they applied was absorbed by a body that was simply not built like other human bodies. Former NBA referee Eric Lewis compared LeBron's officiating challenge to Shaquille O'Neal. He explained that Shaq would get hammered, but it looked like nobody touched him. He was that strong. He would go right up. And the same principle applied to LeBron. His physical dominance made it genuinely difficult for officials to determine whether contact that would have stopped a normal player had meaningfully affected him. Wikipedia. That is not an excuse for missed calls. That is a structural reality of officiating a player who exists outside the physical norms that the rulebook was designed around. The NBA's officiating guidelines, the definitions of what constitutes a foul, what is marginal, what is incidental, were written with average NBA players in mind. LeBron James is not an average NBA player. He never has been, and the mismatch between a player built like he is and a rulebook designed around players built differently has been a source of tension from his very first season. On January 28, 2023, in a game against the Boston Celtics, LeBron James drove to the basket in the final seconds of a tied game, was fouled by Jason Tatum, and did not get the call. The game went to overtime. The Lakers lost. In the official pool report afterward, Eric Lewis admitted it. He said the crew missed the play. He said there was contact from Tatum on LeBron's drive. He said at the time, during the game, they did not see a foul. Wikipedia. The referee admitted it, publicly, after the game,
in writing that the call was missed, that LeBron James had been fouled and the game had continued incorrectly, and the Lakers, rightfully, completely understandably, were furious, because admitting the error afterward does not change the outcome. The loss stays in the record, the game stays in the standings, and LeBron James, sitting with a towel over his head at his locker, barely looking up, said the words that the entire basketball world quoted the next morning. He said he did not understand. He said he watched basketball every single day, and he said something that cut deeper than any specific criticism of any specific official. He said the best player on earth could not get a call.
The National Basketball Referees Association itself acknowledged the mistake publicly. They issued a statement saying that referees, like everyone else, make mistakes. They said they had made one at the end of that game and that it was gut-wrenching. They said it would weigh heavily and cause sleepless nights as they strive to be the best referees they could be. Gut-wrenching. Sleepless nights. The referee's own union used that language about a single missed call in a regular season January game because they understood the magnitude of what had happened, because they understood that when the call is missed on LeBron James, it does not stay in the building where it happened. It goes everywhere, immediately, permanently. And then the story took a turn that made the entire situation even more complicated. Eric Lewis, the referee who had admitted missing the call in the Celtics game, retired in August 2023 while under investigation for possible social media violations. The probe centered on allegations he had used a burner account to comment on officiating decisions. He cooperated fully with the league's investigation, met several requirements, including stress management counseling and training on responsible social media use, and was eventually reinstated to the NBA's officiating program in December 2025, assigned to the G League. A referee under investigation for using a secret account to comment on his own officiating decisions, had been the one who missed the call on LeBron James in January 2023. The institutional dysfunction that produced that moment, the combination of a missed call, a public admission, and an official with a secret social media operation, is the backdrop against which every LeBron James complaint about officiating must now be understood. Then came December 2025, and a moment that in any other context would have resulted in immediate ejection from a professional basketball game. During a December 2025 game between the Lakers and the Phoenix Suns, after a physical altercation with Dillon Brooks, LeBron James placed his hand on an NBA referee and lightly shoved her away while being restrained. He had to be held back by teammate Rui Hachimura and head coach J.J. Redick. He received a technical foul. He was not ejected. The reaction from fans was immediate and furious. The word used most frequently was special treatment. Benedict Mathurin had been suspended one game without pay earlier that same season for inappropriate contact with a referee. Rasheed Wallace, Stephen Jackson, DeMarcus Cousins, Chris Paul, all had been immediately ejected for physical contact with officials in previous seasons. LeBron James grabbed a referee's arm, shoved her, and received a technical foul, and walked back to the bench to finish the game. Fans on social media said it was a perfect example of special treatment, that he should have been ejected at minimum, that the league was protecting its biggest star at the expense of its own rules.
That is the context, the missed call, the admitted error, the referee with the burner account, the December incident where he was not ejected for contact with an official, and now, 6 days after the Nikola Jokic no call in Denver on March 5th, on Tuesday, March 10th, LeBron James sat down with Steve Nash and said everything he has been saying in hallways and locker rooms and private conversations for 23 years, out loud, on a podcast for everyone to hear. He and Nash began by discussing the evolution of the gather step, the moment in a player's footwork where the clock starts on how many steps they can legally take before releasing the ball. Nash said the league does not explain what is and what is not a travel anymore, at least not well enough. And James used that as the starting point for a broader argument that had clearly been building inside him for a long time. CBC News. James said as a player it is so inconsistent the way officiating is called. He said as players they just want consistency. He said on any given night you can have one official telling you one thing and then another official telling you another thing. He asked whether this was not a league-wide conversation that officials were having about how they were going to officiate these plays, these moves, these situations, or whether it was just dependent on the individual referee. He said that was the most frustrating part. CNN. One official telling you one thing, another official telling you something completely different. That is not a complaint about a single bad call. That is a structural critique of how the NBA's officiating operates or fails to operate as an institution. What James is describing is not corruption or deliberate bias. He is describing an absence of standardization, a system where the rules exist on paper, but the application of those rules varies so dramatically from official to official, from game to game, from crew to crew, that the players cannot function with any consistent understanding of what the rules actually permit. He gave a specific example: defensive holding, bear hugging. He said some games you can get away with completely bear hugging guys and holding them, and then 2 nights later you can barely put your hands on guys. He asked, plainly, what are they doing? Both hosts agreed they were open to whatever the league decided, whether more physical or less physical, but wanted to see consistency in how it was handled. CBC News. Bear hugging. 2 nights later, you cannot touch anyone. The same player, the same league, the same rule book. Different crews, different calls, different games. And the players, who are asked to perform at the highest possible level, who are paid enormous sums of money to execute at the edge of human athletic capability, are supposed to calibrate their behavior to a standard that changes from Tuesday to Thursday to Saturday with no communication, no explanation, and no consistency. James said they also took issue with what seemed to be repeated overnight rule changes that altered what was allowed on the floor. He said it was not discussed, it just kind of happened, that referees were enforcing things that had shifted without any announcement or explanation to the players, who were supposed to be following the new standard. Military times. Rules that changed. He also addressed the size issue directly. He said he gets a lot from referees, the phrase that it was a marginal play, and he said his response was, what's marginal to you may not be marginal to me if it is affecting my shot. He said, a foul is a foul. If a guy is grabbing his arms and he is just not flailing, or whatever the case may be, that is the consistency that as players you want from officiating. CBC News. Marginal. The word from Denver, the word he said in the locker room that he was so tired of, it reappeared in the podcast, because it is not just a word that frustrated him after one Nikola Jokic no call. It is a word that has followed him for years, a referee's shorthand for, this player is big enough and strong enough that the contact he experiences does not rise to the level of a foul in my judgment. And James is saying, that judgment is inconsistent. That judgment varies based on who is wearing the stripes that night, and that the absence of a consistent standard for what constitutes marginal is exactly what needs to be fixed. He even proposed a potential solution. He asked whether adding a 4th referee might help. He noted that typically you have 3 referees, one of whom goes to the back in case of injury. He floated the idea of one referee staying at the table, not on the floor, specifically to catch situations that the floor officials cannot see in real time. Fox News. A 4th referee, at the table, watching replay, available to catch what 3 officials on the floor inevitably miss. That is not a complaint, that is a policy proposal from a player who, in his 23rd season, has shifted from simply expressing frustration to actively thinking about institutional solutions. He is not just saying the system is broken, he is offering a way to fix it. He made one other important point that got less attention than the criticisms. He acknowledged that referees have a tough job. He said they were not ever going to discredit them. He was not calling for anyone to be fired. He was not accusing anyone of deliberate bias or corruption. He was saying that the framework within which those referees operate, the inconsistent standards, the overnight rule changes, the absence of league-wide communication, was failing both the referees and the players. Fox News. The referees have a tough job. He said that out loud on a podcast where he was simultaneously criticizing the institution they work for. Because LeBron James, after 23 years, understands something that most critics of officiation never bothered to say. The referees are not the problem. The system that fails to prepare, standardize, and communicate with them consistently is the problem, and the players, who are expected to operate perfectly within standards that shift without warning, are the ones who bear the cost of that systemic failure every time they step on the court. And LeBron James is far from alone. Rockets coach Ime Udoka called a December 2025 loss to Denver the most poorly officiated. That is a remarkably reasonable ask from a man who could easily be dismissed as a star player demanding special treatment. He is not asking for more calls. He is not asking for less physicality. He is asking for the rules to mean something consistent, either consistently strict or consistently loose, but consistently something, so that players can make decisions based on a reliable understanding of what the referee is going to do when contact happens. The NBA has not yet responded publicly to James's podcast comments. Adam Silver, the commissioner who has built one of the most player-friendly institutional relationships in the history of American professional sports, has not held a press conference to address the critique. The officiating program has not issued a statement. The league has been silent in a way that suggests either that they are preparing a thoughtful response or that they are hoping the news cycle moves on before they have to answer. But here is why the news cycle is not going to move on. Because LeBron James is 41 years old. Because this is, by almost every credible report, the final or penultimate season of his career. Because the things he says in the last chapter of his playing time carry a different kind of weight than the things he said in year 3, or year 11, or even year 19. He is not building leverage for a contract negotiation. He is not protecting his market value or his endorsement relationships. He is a man who has earned the right to say what he actually thinks, and who, in March of 2026, is choosing to spend some of that right on the question of whether the institution he dedicated his life to is treating all of its participants fairly. As one writer put it, in the aftermath of the podcast, there will always be animosity between a league's players and its officials. That much is true. But with each game that passes, it feels more and more like the NBA needs to get this problem, whether real or just perceived by players and coaches, under control, before the dysfunction continues to undermine the game itself. Real or perceived, that is the critical distinction, because even if LeBron James is wrong about the specifics, even if the data shows that he gets more calls than he thinks, that the Lakers get the benefit of the doubt more than their record suggests, that the marginal calls go his way as often as they go against him, the perception of inconsistency is itself damaging, because when the greatest player in the history of the sport sits down on a podcast watched by millions of people and says the officiating is so inconsistent that players cannot know what the rules are from night to night, that perception becomes reality for every person who watches it. And the NBA's product, its brand, its ability to present itself as the most transparent and fair major professional sports league in America, all of it takes a hit. Whether Adam Silver calls LeBron James this week and has a private conversation about what he heard on that podcast, whether the officiating program announces new standardization efforts in response, whether another player is fined for repeating what James said more bluntly, whether the league simply waits for the story to fade, whatever happens next, the conversation has been started by the greatest player in the history of the sport in his 23rd season, with nothing left to lose and everything still to say. He is so tired of the word marginal. He has been tired of it for 23 years, and on Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, he finally said it loud enough for the whole world to hear.